Hey everybody, Thomas Joseph here with another Kitchen Conundrum. Now, fish, it's one of the most challenging things to cook at home, whether you're drying it out in the oven, or with fish like this, as a salmon, it gets a little too oily. Well, today I'm gonna share with you a foolproof recipe for roasted salmon. You will love it. All right, so to get started, what we're gonna work on first is the allium. And allium, you guys might be saying, what are you talking about? What is that? Well, allium is a group of vegetables. It's things like leeks, scallions, onions, shallots, even garlic. They're all part of the allium family, and they have that kind of signature spiciness to them. And what happens in the oven, especially with how we're gonna prepare these at a high temperature, we're gonna roast the allium first. All of the wonderful sugars in the ingredients kind of melt down, caramelize, and give you this wonderful depth of flavor that's a perfect accompaniment to our salmon. So first, I'm gonna start with the leek. Now, leeks are notoriously dirty, so if you have a very dirty leek, what you should do is trim it first, and then you can give it a really good wash and spin it dry in your salad spinner if you have one. I'm gonna cut this into, I would say, in half. This is a small leek, so look for maybe a younger leek, something that's not too thick in size. They're usually a little bit more tender when they're nice and narrow. And I'm gonna cut this into, I think, quarters. What you're really looking to do when you're roasting vegetables or cooking things together in one pan, or today I'm actually using multiple pans, but we're cooking them at the same time, you wanna make sure that everything is cut in even-sized pieces so that they all roast in a uniform fashion. So this is a good example of a little bit of a dirty leek here. Now what you can do is take this and just plunge it into water, like I said before, and really give it a good wash. Now, I already have some done here, so I'm just gonna throw these over to the side. Trim your scallions. These are thin and tender, so they're not gonna take that long to cook in the oven. So I think I'm gonna leave them whole. That looks nice. So you're gonna need 1.5 pounds of allium in total, and it can be divided up based on what you have on hand or what you can find at your supermarket or your farmer's market. Last but not least, I have one big, beautiful shallot here. Now, if you don't have much experience with shallots, I would encourage you to try them out. They're definitely pungent, like an onion, but there's a complexity to shallots that I would say onions don't have. They also have a really beautiful color, especially when they're roasted. So I trim off the ends, and I'm gonna cut this one, since it's so big, maybe into quarters. If you have smaller shallots, you really only need to cut them in half, but cut them, peel them, and then make sure your oven is preheated to 400 degrees. So we're gonna roast these vegetables at a high temperature. And it's always really important to cook or roast at a high temperature so that you don't encourage steam in the process of cooking. Steam, obviously, at a lower temperature is just gonna make your vegetables soggy. You're not gonna get good color. And also, all of that caramelization that we were talking about before, you're not going to have that at a lower temperature. And I have 2 half-sheet trays here that I'm gonna roast the allium on. Now, spreading out the vegetables helps in caramelization. If everything is crowded onto one pan, again, it encourages steaming, and that makes soggy vegetables that don't have much color or flavor. So divide your vegetables up evenly between the 2 baking sheets, and then a good drizzle of olive oil. You need about, I would say, a tablespoon of olive oil per tray. And then some salt, kosher salt. We always use kosher salt in the test kitchens here at Martha Stewart Living. Our preferred brand is Diamond Crystal, but if you can't find Diamond Crystal, you could also use Morton's. And Morton's is a little bit more, I would say, potent in terms of the salinity, so you might want to use a little bit less. Pepper, always, is great. Now, this recipe is very simple. I would say the elements that we're using, the allium with just the salt, pepper, and olive oil, it's pretty simple, and we're going to accompany this dish with a really flavorful mint pesto. So there's gonna be a lot of really great fresh flavor at the end, which pairs nicely with the rich caramelized vegetables and also with the fatty salmon that we're gonna be using today. So I'm just kind of shifting these around on the tray, giving them a little bit of a toss, and then these go right into that preheated oven, 400 degrees, for about 25 to 30 minutes until they're really nice, golden and caramelized. All right, so our beautiful allium, they're out of the oven. They've roasted again for about 25 to 30 minutes and they've cooled slightly. Now I turn the oven down to 325 degrees and I position the rack in the middle of the oven. And we're gonna cook the fish on top of this bed of beautiful allium at a low temperature. I think this is actually one of the things that people oftentimes make a mistake with. They cook their fish at too high of a temperature, and what happens is the outside, the exterior of the fish gets really dry, crumbly, and sometimes you'll even see the fat within the salmon fillet itself, it oozes out, and that's when you know you've really overcooked your salmon, so be very mindful of that. Now, I have a beautiful piece of salmon. This is a center cut portion of the fillet, and it's a farmed salmon, but you could also use a wild caught salmon as well. It'll be a little bit more expensive and you might actually not have as thick of a piece. Usually wild caught salmon is a little bit thinner, so you might need a little bit longer of a piece of salmon. But I have it here in front of me. This is really beautiful. Now, one of the things that I like to do, and this is skinless, by the way, everybody, is take some paper towel and just gently blot off the salmon. Now, you should do this with any fish that you have, even proteins like chicken, even steaks, to get good color on the outside. And again, to avoid that steaming, blotting off any excess moisture is really key. Now, I like to dress this up with a little bit of some olive oil, just a drizzle, some pepper, and some salt. Now be pretty generous with your salt here because this is a pretty thick piece of salmon. It's 3 pounds in total, so you really want to make sure that you're using enough salt and pepper to really flavor the salmon. Just gonna flip this over, and then a little bit more olive oil on the bottom side. Freshly cracked pepper. Now, if you don't have a pepper mill, I would encourage you to go out and get one because it's really the best way to get that fresh pepper flavor in your recipes. Oftentimes, if you buy pre-ground pepper or if you grind it in advance and keep it out in a little crock, it really loses its spice and potency. So cracking it fresh is really ideal. Again, a little bit more salt on this backside, and then this goes right on top of the beautiful allium. And now this is going into a 325 degree oven for about 20 minutes. And be really mindful to check maybe at 15 to see how it's cooking. You really are looking for a nice opaque coloring, nothing too kind of brown and red. This is gonna be a nice pale pink. And I'll show you how to test for doneness in a second. All right, so now it's time to make the delicious mint pesto that goes on top of this salmon. And it's a really simple recipe, but I would encourage you to use this recipe as a base. You can customize it to your tastes if maybe you're not a big fan of mint. You could use something like parsley or even cilantro if you're a fan of cilantro. So first up, I have 2 cups of mint leaves that are picked. Now, I'm gonna dump these into the food processor. This goes down first so that the blade can really chop up all of the leaves. Now, if you didn't have a food processor, you could certainly do this by hand. You could just chop this mixture up on your cutting board. If you have one of those mezzalunas, those work really well here, or even a mortar and pestle, you can pulverize this into a paste. That's actually how classic pesto is made. It's made in a mortar and pestle, not in a food processor. So I have 2 tablespoons of almonds. These are slivered almonds that are roasted, so they have more flavor. For the most part, when you're using nuts in recipes, it's always best to toast them so that you get the really great flavor out of them. This way your recipes will be even more flavorful in the end. So right into the food processor. And then I have some capers. Now, this is a 1/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons of capers that have been packed in brine and drained. Now, I would say you could probably use 1/3 of a cup of capers. That measurement would be fine as well. I love capers. They add a nice brininess, salinity to whatever it is that you're making. If you don't have access to capers, you could certainly use olives here in place. You'll get that same kind of flavor note, and even the texture is slightly similar. So I'm going to pulverize this up a little bit, and then I'm going to add in the salt, pepper, and the olive oil. So just pulse this together until you get a nice chop, and then we'll pulverize it into a paste. All right, so this looks pretty good. I'm gonna season it up with some salt and pepper. Again, really important for you to flavor and season every single layer of your dish. This way you'll have something really tasty in the end. You know what would be really great in this as well? A little bit of lemon zest would add a nice brightness that would complement the mint really well. And also, lemon goes really great with fish. So a good amount of pepper and then a half of a cup of extra virgin olive oil. Now, when we use olive oil in the test kitchen, and what we try to tell all of our readers and viewers is it's always best to have maybe 2 different types of olive oils at home. One that's used for cooking, so something that's not too expensive, not too flavorful, that you can use for sauteing, that you can use for, roasting your salmon, and then something that's maybe a little bit elevated in flavor and usually with that a little bit of price, so that you can use it in salad dressings. You could use it in a pesto like this where you're really counting on the flavor to come through. So invest in good quality ingredients and your dishes will be even better, I promise you. Top on and then puree this into a nice paste. And now this is ready to go. And I'm gonna just transfer this to a bowl. This can go into the refrigerator while your salmon finishes roasting in the oven. What I would say is this is something you should do towards the end of the process. If you're entertaining with friends and family, or this is just kind of a weeknight dinner, it might be best to make this kind of towards the end so that the mint in the pesto doesn't brown too much. You wanna make sure it has a nice vibrant color to it. Now, you can cover this with a piece of plastic wrap. If you are, I would recommend that you place the plastic wrap right on top of the pesto itself so that it doesn't oxidize. But again, this can go into your refrigerator while we wait for our beautiful salmon to come out of the oven. All right, the salmon is out of the oven. You can see it looks so beautiful. It's nice and pink, as I had said before, and there's not a whole lot of that kind of white fat coming out of the salmon fillet, so you know that you haven't overcooked this. Now, a really great way to tell whether or not your fish is done is to take a paring knife like this, just insert it into the thickest part of the fish, leave it there for a few seconds, and then you can pull it out, feel the tip of the knife. If it's warm to the touch, you know that the salmon is cooked nicely. If it's really, really hot, you might have gone over, and if it's cool to the touch, it needs a little bit more time in the oven, but this is perfect. You can also use an instant read thermometer here if you have one of those digital thermometers. In the thickest part of the salmon fillet, about 122 degrees is where I like to go, because there is a little bit of carryover cooking that happens as the salmon is resting. So now the real trick, and let's kind of cross our fingers here. We need to get the salmon and the beautiful onions onto a serving platter. Now this is what's great about this dish, is that you can use the roasting rack, we'll call it, underneath to help you in leveraging the salmon from the pan over to the serving platter. Now, kind of come under the salmon. I like to use 2 of them, but if you only have 1, you could certainly make do with that. 1 on each side. Shift and shimmy them underneath the fillet itself, and then I'm gonna go right onto the serving platter in a quick motion. Now be careful, but be quick. So right up onto the serving platter, nice and easy. Now make sure that you include all of the beautiful vegetables around. And this is a really great meal for entertaining, but it's also perfect for weeknight cooking because it cooks so quickly. So now for a finishing touch, a little sprinkling of salt. Now, when I'm seasoning at the end of cooking or when I'm ready to present, I like to use a flaky sea salt. This is Malden sea salt, but any really great crystal-like salt, whether it's white like this, or you can find, pink salt, or there's even gray sea salt. Anything that has good texture to it is really helpful here in finishing the dish. So a sprinkling of salt over the top. Now our pesto, I'm gonna just put it on the side in a nice serving bowl. You could put it over the top, but I think this is so pretty by itself. If you're gonna bring it to the table, bring it to the table like this. Pesto goes right into this bowl. And I can't wait to give this a taste. Now, I'm gonna take a little off the side here, but really you should bring this to the table with some nice serving fork and spoon so that you can gently flake off a beautiful piece of salmon. Now, this is nice and rosy pink still. A little bit of allium on the side, just to taste. And now a little bit of juice of lemon is always great with fish, especially an oily fish that's really fatty. It helps to cut through that, the acidity, and a tiny little taste of the pesto. A really simple way to roast your fish at home without overcooking it. Remember all of those tips and tricks So there you go, guys. Now, as always, if you have any kitchen conundrums, please reach out to us using the hashtag Kitchen Conundrums. We love to hear from you, and we love to solve your kitchen problems. Enjoy, guys. Now, if you like these Kitchen Conundrum videos, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell, and share for even more content.